further on Nirmala Sitharaman's first budget in the Modi government's second term that will be presented on the 5th of July. What should be the focus of this budget? Will this budget take off from the interim budget that Piyush Goyal presented before the elections? Will there be a focus on growth to kickstart an economy that is clearly slowing down? Can we afford a stimulus package though? Undoubtedly, this will be a challenging budget to balance. Speaking to us now on what he would hope to see in this budget is Arvind Panagriya, former VC, Niti Aayog. Mr. Panagriya, thank you so much for speaking to us on the India development debate. Let's start by talking about what an interesting and challenging time for Nirmala Sitharaman to present her first budget as finance minister.
Indeed, it is because, growth in the last quarter, for which we have the numbers, did fall below 6%, 5.8%. And that decline has been happening for almost 4 quarters now. So it does pose a big challenge. It is also coming on the back of a very, very big mandate to Prime Minister Modi. So certainly in that sense, it is a challenge. But at the same time, every challenge comes with an opportunity, as the saying goes. And so, I would expect that the finance minister would rise to the occasion and present a budget which brings growth back.
There's this whole debate going on whether the focus should be on growth or fiscal consolidation. There is a point of view that even if we breach 3.4% this time round, it's okay, considering that the economy is going through a slowdown and a boost is more important. What's your view on this, Mr. Panagriya?
I personally don't think that there is a conflict between fiscal consolidation and growth. I continue to believe that fiscal consolidation should actually continue. And certainly we should not breach the existing fiscal deficit. I don't expect that the government will do that either. Because growth doesn't depend only on the government running large deficits. Our emphasis on infrastructure is the right one. And expenditures can still be shifted towards infrastructure, which means, towards capital. So that feature can be strengthened by simply reallocating expenditures towards what we may call capital expenditures, but largely infrastructure. So in this sense, then the capex cycle, as far as the government is concerned, continues to be given the boost. But at the same time, you don't want to crowd out the private sector. After all, private sector investment is very important. And if the government really soaks up large part of the financial savings that are available, then that would leave the private sector high and dry. And a lot of the high productivity investments do come from private sector. So I think, I see no conflict really here between the growth objective and the fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline.
Another big challenge, of course, is the rollout and the funding for big welfare schemes that the government announced before the elections in the interim budget, and of course some steps announced right after the elections, like the expansion of the ambit of the PM Kisan scheme, for example. Ayushman Bharat, we'll expect even a larger, more comprehensive rollout this time round, and there seems little chance that the Modi government would want to lose, the goodwill from its welfare schemes. How challenging do you see that?
Challenge is there, but I have argued that there are a lot of other centrally sponsored schemes at which the government ought to look. There are wasteful expenditures within the system in many of those schemes. We ought to take a closer look at those. I have argued now that we ought to think and begin to think in terms of sunset on these schemes and ask the ministries to justify. So, I totally feel that we will need to expand expenditure on Ayushman Bharat. That is a very well-conceived program, except for it actually requires a lot more expenditure, lot more financing than we currently have for it. So some of these will be. PM Kisan is not a huge challenge because on the margin what has been added is a small amount.
We've seen one clear kind of effort to boost agricultural incomes with the PM Kisan Yojana, though that is more of an income support scheme. Do you see a lot more coming in this budget in terms of actual spends and not announcements of schemes? Because we've seen a lot of announcements on schemes. Do you think that that is something that cannot be deferred at this point and will be a focus and a priority?
You see, here also, what will happen and what should happen, maybe two different things, but I can only focus on what should happen. Once again, we need to increase the element of investment, public investment in agriculture, as opposed to government expenditures on agriculture. And that, of course, means that, rejigging of a lot of the current expenditures, some of the subsidies that benefit only the rich. Really look at the fertilizer subsidy. Something needs to be done there. We have sort of put it on the back burner, but the discussion has to be done exactly how to rejig in a way that you reduce some of that spend on fertilizer subsidy. And similarly, some of the others, So what we need to do, what had happened in the 1990s and 2000s was that particularly in the 1990s, and that process continued later on, is that what we used to public expenditure came to be replaced by savings, meaning the resources came to be replaced by transfers. So public expenditure suffered as a result. We increased the subsidies on fertilizer, electricity, water, others. So, rather than doing public expenditure in agriculture, which is what we did in the 1980s, we have shifted to these subsidies. But we need to rethink. We need to take a look back, see how to raise public investment in agriculture rather than subsidies.
Okay, let me come to the elephant in the room, jobs and unemployment and boosting that sector of the economy. It became such a political question that people have stopped talking about it after the elections, as if with the elections, the basic issue of providing employment to millions of Indians and those who are graduating every year or entering the job market has now disappeared. What do you think the government should do to boost this, or should we take the age-old sort of commonsensical view that first you boost private investment and then the jobs will follow automatically?
No, I don't think we can take that sort of passive attitude towards it. Let me first state what I have stated many times, that the problem is not so much jobs, but it is good jobs. Jobs that pay well, jobs characterized by high productivity. And this is where I think, we really need to get on to an export-centered strategy. Virtually every country that has succeeded in achieving the objective of good jobs alongside high and rapid growth has done so by succeeding in the global markets. Ultimately, and our own success, by the way, when we look back, starting from 2003-04, when we really grew 8% plus, was built on very successful export sector. Within a matter of less than a decade, we went from $50 billion of merchandise exports to $300 billion, a six-fold expansion. So we need to return to that. We need to center our efforts on very much the exports. And that means getting your exchange rate right. That means doing the reforms that would allow the medium and large firms to flourish, trying to woo the multinationals that are today leaving the Chinese shores to other countries, to our shores, so do whatever it will take to bring them there. And I've also talked about, these autonomous employment zones now, where you create large regions with autonomy in policy with respect to labor, land, etc., so that they can operate in a sort of more competitive environment for the firms. And so these are the kind of things we need to do to ultimately create good jobs, because large number of our workers are simply employed either in agriculture, or they are in self-employment in industry and services, or in companies that are 5 workers or fewer. Even the latest data from the PLFS report show that 75% of our non-agricultural workers are in companies that are 19 workers or fewer. So these are small firms. They don't have such high productivity. So I've in fact said that because micro and small employ a lot of people doesn't mean that that's where you want to keep pushing more and more workers. You want the workers to come out of micro and small into medium and large, and that requires an export-centered strategy.
Last question to you, Mr. Panagria. We started by talking about how challenging this is going to be for the finance minister when she stands up on the 5th of July. What would be the top 3 things that you would like to see in this first budget of hers?
My sense now is that big things may not get announced in the budget, and I would certainly not take the signal that if they're not announced in the budget, they'll not happen. But we all have our wish list. So let me put maybe 3 things you asked. So I would like to see first GST simplification. So at least some sort of announcement that this is where we are going. Hopefully, just with 2 very clean rates, we can have 5% and 18%. So consolidate 12% and 28% both into 18%. So that will be my first. Second, I think it is be a good time to make good on the promise made earlier to bring the corporate profit tax down to 25% and clean, 25% with no other surcharges, but all exemptions removed. So that tax revenue will not decline. And I would say the third thing I would like to see in the budget announced is a clear statement that the government is going to genuinely privatize many of the PSUs. There has been general consensus within the cabinet, at least, on this, which has approved 40 plus public sector enterprises, and of course Air India. So all that these enterprises where there is no public purpose served, largely those are activities that can be undertaken in the private sector or to be privatized. So that would be my third.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Mr. Panagria there with his wish list for the budget, and I'm sure the finance minister has a ton of wish lists right now on her table, but this can't be an easy one to put out there. The important takeaway though, not everything is going to happen in the budget. We will expect though to see a roadmap for the next 5 years that this government will put through. Thank you so much for joining us. So here on the India Development Debate, we want to bring you the best voices, and today we're speaking just before the next budget, talking about what could be expected from the first budget of the Modi government's second term. Joining us now on this is Ashima Goel, who is member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Welcome, Ms. Goel. Thank you for speaking with us. What do you think are the biggest challenges that the Finance Minister faces before this budget?
And the biggest challenges are that there is something of a slowdown in growth that has to be addressed. But at the same time, there are fiscal pressures and a commitment to a fiscal consolidation path, which will not allow too much of an increase in expenditure. In my view, the way to reconcile these two is to because it is the same government coming in and there are a lot of ready schemes, begin spending quickly. So give a boost to expenditure in the first few months, and also reallocate, because certain schemes are nearing completion. There are certain unproductive schemes. Money can be reallocated from these towards those that would be more effective.
Sure. Right now, Ms. Goyal, there's this whole debate about growth versus fiscal consolidation. There's one school of thought that says we should stick to our 3.4% fiscal deficit line, that red line, but others say that you can relax it right now, especially when there are signs of slowdown. Where do you stand on that debate? What's your view?
I think that the deficit and government spending does need to be counter-cyclical, and if there is a slowdown, they should be able to spend more. But unfortunately, as I said, they have committed to this FRBM path, and if every time you are deviating, it sends a very poor signal that you are saying something and doing something else. The credibility of the government suffers. And especially since this is the first budget of this new government, they should communicate a vision. And I think it's important to communicate that they are committed to fiscal consolidation. And therefore, in this budget, they should stick to the target. But over the longer term, this budget has to be presented in a macroeconomic framework which is agreed to. In the longer term, however, this framework can be adjusted. The FRBM, the committee's recommendations were too strict in that they did not allow counter-cyclical adjustment. So that should be implemented. The macroeconomic framework itself should be adjusted. But as long as you're working in that framework, you should not deviate from it.
Okay, let's talk about slowdown, and that has dominated the headlines over the last couple of months. What do you think can be done in this budget to make sure that there's more money in the hands of consumers and at least consumer spending increases?
I think it's not just spending more, but spending faster, spending quicker, and spending in areas that lead to more job creation, put more money in the hands of people. I think this low-income housing is one such area. And then something for agriculture, and then maybe some strategic tax cuts, simplification as part of tax reform, simplification of the GST. But I think one major thing they can do, because there's a sort of freezing of credit in the markets. There's a very high fear of credit risk and a large stock of unsold housing in real estate. The slowdown in NBFC credit has not been made up by banks, although they are lending more. But they seem to be lending more to PSUs rather than to private parties, because there's a fear of credit risk is very high currently. So if they do something in this area, announce some fund with support from the RBI, which gives some liquidity support, the RBI is doing that. I think you could see a restart of lending, and that would lead to more consumption and investment.
Another big focus, of course, has been about employment generation, and we've been speaking about it on the show this last week as well. Do you think it should be and can be a big focus in this budget? Of course, well knowing that new jobs cannot be created in large numbers in one budget, but at least the path be set?
Yes, definitely. So when there is a sort of global slowdown, then spending more on non-tradable goods will create, such as housing, infrastructure, will create more jobs internally. So that is one way of increasing jobs, but ultimately the private sector has to start investing. And there is a view that with the political stability, now the elections are over, there will be a revival of animal spirits and some recovery. Certain industry is running into capacity constraints and will need to invest and expand employment and production. Data shows there's some increase in exports and invisibles. Here we have a comparative advantage. This could be further taken forward, maybe with some tax incentives. And in general, for industry, ease of doing business as well as reducing the cost of doing business will help them to create more jobs.
A 90,000 crore divestment target in the interim budget. Do you think that needs to be relooked at? Do you think there needs to be a relook at revenue targets more holistically and realistically at this juncture?
I think that, as I said, the same government is coming in and they have a lot of plans ready. So they should be able to kick off this disinvestment quickly. In fact, that is a larger strategy of monetizing many public assets, including property, land, making that available for maybe private industry. So get over this land acquisition, which is a major cost for doing business in India. So they should do some restructuring, but which will help industry also, and that means selling, privatization. Another reason they'll be able to do more now is that stock markets have recovered. Earlier stock markets were really performing poorly, so it was very difficult to sell. Air India, they've been trying for a long time, didn't have success first time. They will tweak the program and then see if they have more success now.
Okay, I'm going to wrap by asking you the question that has almost become a regular before every budget. Every budget we wait for big bang reforms. Do you think we will see a big bold statement at least at the start of this second term, or will it be more incrementalism like we have seen in a lot of previous budgets of the Modi government?
It's very difficult to produce a big bang every time, and I think big bangs are dangerous. So what I would look for is really some process reform. See, if they announce a movement to accrual budgeting, that would be wonderful. More transparency and some confidence, something that gives confidence to markets and to the private sector, so they can start borrowing and lending. Perhaps some recap of banks could be announced this time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. Goel, for speaking with us today on the India development debate. Well, that's all the time we have, but as all the budget wish lists go out there, we also hope that there is some serious, kind of pathway drawn on the whole movement of water conservation. And now that the Jal Shakti Ministry is also in place, there have already been signs from the government that they're very serious about it, but you have to put your money where your mouth is. So if there are some good solid allocations in this budget, we can hope to see some movement there. On that note, I thank you for joining us today on the show. We'll see you back tomorrow.